The bride who couldn't stop smiling, not when she walked down the aisle, not when she said, "I do," not even when the lights began to flicker. Everyone thought it was joy, until they realized her smile wasn't human. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The chandeliers of the Abuja event center shimmered against gold-trimmed walls, laughter flowed like champagne, and every eye turned to the bride, radiant, graceful, and smiling. But something about that smile felt wrong. At first, guests thought it was nerves, the usual bridal glow, maybe too much excitement. But as she walked slowly down the aisle, veil brushing the floor, that same wide smile didn't move, didn't fade. It only grew sharper. The photographers clicked. Children giggled. Yet, somewhere among the whispers and the flash of cameras, a quiet unease spread through the hall. One bridesmaid, her closest friend, leaned to another and whispered, "Is she okay?" The bride's eyes were fixed on the groom, but they didn't shine with love. They glimmered with something else, something unreadable, like she was smiling for someone else. By the time the officiant began to speak, half the guests had already noticed. That smile. It wasn't joy. It was a warning no one understood. The ceremony continued, but unease had already taken its seat among the guests. Every time the bride turned, her smile followed, fixed, stretched, and motionless, as though her face no longer belonged to her. Whispers began to rise like smoke. At one table, an aunt leaned close to her husband. "She wasn't like this during the engagement," she murmured. "Remember that introduction? She couldn't even look the man in the eye." Another guest frowned, glancing toward the front. "I heard she fainted at her bridal shower last week," he whispered. "They said she was seeing things." The murmurs deepened, folding over each other like waves. Yet the groom, handsome and proud in his white agbada, seemed untouched by the tension. He held her hand tightly, smiling at the crowd, never noticing how cold her fingers had become. The band struck a high note, but a strange silence hung around the couple, like the music refused to come near them. And behind the bride's veil, something flickered. Just for a second. A shadow that didn't belong to her face. She blinked, as though someone had called her name from far away. And then that dreadful smile returned, wider than before. The maid of honor shivered. Something about the bride's expression felt borrowed. The reception was meant to be joyous, a celebration bursting with laughter and dance. But joy had left the room long ago. The bride sat quietly beside her new husband, that same haunting smile carved across her lips. Her eyes were distant, as if watching something no one else could see. When the master of ceremonies called for the cake cutting, everyone clapped. The music picked up again, drums and saxophones filling the hall with forced cheer. The couple stood, walked hand in hand to the cake. And that's when the air changed. As the groom held her hand to slice through the white frosting, her smile widened unnaturally. Guests near the stage swore they heard a faint giggle, but not from her lips. It sounded as though it came from somewhere behind her. The knife trembled in her grasp. For a brief second, her hand twitched violently, and the knife cut too deep, slicing through the bottom layer of the cake and scraping the table beneath. The sound echoed. The hall fell silent. The bride turned her head slowly, her eyes scanning the guests still smiling. But this time, there was recognition in her gaze, as if she was searching for someone. Her eyes stopped on an elderly woman seated at the far corner, her late mother's best friend, Mama Chica. The woman froze under the stare. The bride whispered something, lips barely moving. No one else heard, but Mama Chica gasped and clutched her chest. Then, just as quickly, the bride turned back, lifted her glass, and laughed softly. That same hollow, chilling sound. The guests forced their smiles again. But deep down, everyone knew something sacred had been broken in that hall. As dusk settled outside, the reception drew closer to its end. The bride's smile hadn't faded once. Some guests had already left, uneasy and shaken. Others stayed, pretending to laugh, pretending not to notice the shadow that seemed to follow her wherever she moved. But Mama Chica remained silent, eyes fixed on the bride. She alone knew what that smile meant. Years ago, before this day of glitz and glamour, the bride, a daisy, had once gone to a certain woman named Garki, a spiritualist known for granting favors to those desperate enough to ask. A daisy had been heartbroken, poor, and humiliated after being abandoned by the very man she now called her husband. She had knelt before the woman and begged, "Please, make him see me again. Make him love me." And the woman had smiled, a smile too wide, too knowing. "Love can be given," she said, "but it must be fed." That night, a daisy made her vow. In exchange for eternal love, she would offer her joy, her laughter, her happiness to the spirit that granted her wish. But the spirit's mark was cruel. It did not take her joy silently. It left her with a smile she could never control, a smile that no longer belonged to her. Now, standing before everyone, that spirit's presence was back, collecting what was owed. As Mama Chica rose shakily to her feet, the bride's smile twitched. "You shouldn't have come," a daisy whispered. The old woman's voice trembled. "Child, you made a vow you cannot keep." The lights flickered. The band stopped. And for the first time, the groom saw it. The shadow standing just behind his bride, smiling the same smile. The spirit's grin widened through her face, forcing a daisy's lips into that horrifying expression until tears spilled from her eyes. She wasn't smiling from joy. She was smiling from torment. By the time dawn broke over Abuja, the story of that wedding had already begun to spread. Some said the bride fainted before she could leave the hall. Others swore they saw two figures smiling as she was carried away, one in white, one in shadow. But no one really knew what became of a daisy after that night. The groom disappeared for months, unable to explain the things he had seen. The photographs from the wedding were never printed. Every single image showed her smiling, even in moments she hadn't been facing the camera. Mama Chica returned to her village soon after, whispering prayers and warning the young women who came to her for advice. "Be careful what you ask spirits for," she would say. "They give fast, but they never forget their debt." And somewhere in the city, behind closed doors, a daisy sat by her mirror, that same haunting smile frozen on her lips. Every dawn, she prayed to stop smiling, and every dusk, the spirit answered her silence with laughter only she could hear. The city moved on. The story became a whisper, a caution told to brides-to-be. But those who had been at that wedding would never forget the sound, that hollow giggle behind her smile. Because sometimes the smile you envy is the price someone else is paying. What did you get to learn from this story? Kindly drop your thoughts and questions below. Do well to hit the subscribe button to see more emotional and exciting stories like this on Afrotales by Siri.